My FPL Game Week 6 team selection and my wildcard is active. I spent a few days trying to deliberate on a few things that have happened so far this week that we will talk about. That will push me over the edge to activate my wildcard, and it has been activated since Wednesday. I've made some transfers. We're catching price changes. In today's video, we'll have a look at what forced me to change my mind, why I potentially made the decision to activate my wildcard in Game Week 6 rather than Game Week 7 or Game Week 12 like I spoke about. But most importantly, we'll have a look at my draft. We'll have a look at the players that are in there at the moment, what potentially could change, and what has changed from my previous team as well. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim, and subscribe if you are new around here as well. And today, it is my Game Week 6 team selection, but of course, it is a special one. It is Wildcard active team selection, and it has been activated. I have clicked the button. There is no undoing it. Before we do that, let's have a quick review of Game Week 5, although it does feel like a long time ago, particularly with all the wildcard planning that we have done so far this week. I got 80 points, which was 12 above the safety score. A reminder that the safety score is the score I need in order to not change rank and to get a flat grey arrow. So it was a big boost. I moved from 429k back inside the top 150k up to 146k. A game week rank inside the top 500k as well. Anything inside the top 1 million and you're looking at a pretty good game week. 372 points overall. Now, I did get a little bit lucky. There was no minutes at all from Diogo Jota, who auto-subbed out. And in his place came Smith Rowe. Now, I do actually think that if Diogo Jota had played in that game against Bournemouth, he probably would have got some returns. But, of course, happy that Smith Rowe didn't end up staying on my bench. Mo Salah has been in for 2 weeks and he's probably been a little bit disappointing. Has not returned nearly as much as I wanted to. Would have been better off just keeping Saka, keeping the transfers, and just captaining Erling Haaland every single week. And that is pretty much the plan from here on out until the rest of the season, unless something drastically changes in terms of form. So not much else to report. Of course, I did start Gabriel because I didn't want to bench any more of his points after I benched a 15-pointer from him in Game Week 4. That is how Game Week 5 got on. Let me know the points. I know it's a while ago, but I am always interested to hear how you got on in the previous game week. Game Week 5 is gone. Let's have a look at Game Week 6 and, of course, that wildcard. So just to talk about all the things that forced me into that early wildcard compared to what my plan was. So I knew that the plan potentially was Game Week 6, Game Week 7 and Game Week 12. A few things that happened that made me reduce the chance of the Game Week 12 wildcard and make it between Game Week 6 and Game Week 7. The first of all, as I did a little bit more planning, and if I'm wildcarding in players like Semenyo, if I'm wildcarding in triple Arsenal, and then wildcarding in players like Erling Haaland and maybe even Rico Lewis as well, that does boost the early wildcard, and it does mean that the fixture swings in Game Week 12 are not quite as appealing. Then a few other things happened, particularly the João Pedro injury. He looks like he's ruled out for Game Week 6. We'll cover that in the final decisions video tomorrow. But I did plan on playing him in several of the weeks between now and Game Week 12, and he's ruled out for Game Week 6, and they basically don't know how long he'll be out for. I'd be surprised if he plays before the international break, which would be Game Week 7, which I would need to play him because there's a lot of bad fixtures in Game Week 7. So not only would I be taking a -4 going into Game Week 7 to try and fix my team, I now would be without João Pedro as well, which would be a -8 or even more. So I did think that a wildcard in either Game Week 6 or 7 is going to be most likely rather than deciding to hold it. Then a few more things that have happened this week that potentially change that. The first of which is Branthwaite being back in full Everton training. Doesn't directly impact my team, but it does mean keeping the likes of Henderson and Eze this week looks not quite as favourable as it might have done before, given they go up against an Everton team who have not looked great, but I do expect Branthwaite's return to boost it. The other thing was the Rodri injury, and I do think that massively boosts Rico Lewis as a potential option. The only game he hasn't started so far this season is the Arsenal game, but if you remember early on in the season when they were playing without Rodri, Rico Lewis was a fantastic buy and looking like he was getting so far forward, and I expect we'll see a lot more of that in some of the easier games they have coming up over the next few weeks now that Rodri looks like he's out for the season. A few other things to add in there. Diaz got a full rest on Wednesday evening as well. That did boost him and then knock Jota and Salah down. Not knock the others down, but it made Luis Diaz go probably higher above in the rankings than maybe I had him before, given he did have the full rest. I don't think Luis Diaz is a perfect long-term option, but I like him as a short-term as a result. And then the other one is there are lots of price changes, right? And that's what forced me mainly, on top of these other things, to go Game Week 6 rather than Game Week 7. Eze not being as good, Diaz being a better buy, getting the 0.2 to 0.8 swings that I will likely get on Thursday and Friday evening. And then, of course, on Saturday and going into next week as well, wildcarders will likely have a pretty similar team. The Game Week 7 wildcard also looks very, very similar to Game Week 6. There aren't many things that will change, unless, of course, there's big things that happen in the Premier League this season, like Havertz going back up front might change the Game Week 7 wildcard, or particular players finding form or dropping off form might change the wildcard. But outside of that, things are not looking massively different. And then the final benefit to Game Week 6 over Game Week 7 was I get my free transfer back. Of course, I used a free transfer early on in the week of doing Diogo Jota to Brian Mbeumo. So going into Game Week 7 now and then rolling into Game Week 8, I will have more transfers than if I decide to wildcard next week because I've already used one transfer this week. So there were several things that forced me to eliminate Game Week 12 and then a few more things this week that made me just go, Game Week 6 is better than Game Week 7. So let's get it done despite being a few days late. So let's dive in and have a look at that Game Week 6 wildcard then. In goal, we're going with David Raya. Now, he didn't feature midweek and apparently has a slight muscular injury, but I am expecting him to be back. If he's not available, I can move to someone at a similar price. It would probably be Ederson because I don't have triple up on Manchester City and they have a good long-term run of fixtures, but I am expecting David Raya back. There will be an Arsenal press conference on Friday, so I'll hear what Arteta's got to say then, but I am expecting him to be back. For me, he's the best long-term goalkeeper in the game. The points he scored so far this season are also very impressive. And then we've gone with Fabianski as the backup. 4 million, doesn't look like he's going to drop in price. Sometimes gets some minutes with Areola getting the occasional injury. So he is in there as the 4 million, but we'll just play David Raya every week. I love the Arsenal defense so much. I want to double up on it. Of course, Gabriel feels like the best defender in the game. 5 returns in 5 with 3 clean sheets and 2 goals. He is an absolute monster from set pieces. His goal threat is crazy, crazy good. And I know he might miss 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 games for Arsenal over Saliba, but he's going to score more goals than someone like a Saliba, as we've seen so far this season. So I am going to go with Gabriel. There's no doubt about that. And I've had him since Game Week 1, and I got him at 6 million, and he's already rising in price. We've gone with Trent Alexander-Arnold as the second one. Despite the Liverpool fixtures getting a little bit worse, I do like what he offers. He does look like he's a little bit back to his best from an attacking point of view. Has created so many chances so far this season. He's actually top amongst defenders for expected goal involvement. He's 7.1. Wolves away this week and the long-term fixtures still remain absolutely fine. They've also kept lots of clean sheets so far this season, look good in the Champions League, and a lot of things putting together. The attacking threat, the clean sheets, how nailed he feels at the moment as well. I'm pretty happy with Trent at that price. And then the big thing for me, as I spoke about earlier, is how Rico Lewis looks like a very good option now. With the Rodri injury, with the sort of Walker performances that we've seen, and actually early on in the season when Rodri was injured, quite how attacking Rico Lewis was, I think it's worth taking the gamble at 4.7 million. And luckily enough, given I've got 0.0 million in the bank, Mikalenko of Everton has dropped down to 4.3 million. He has a really nice run of fixtures. He's back in full training after missing with illness in Game Week 5. They're also expected to have Branthwaite back this week, which is a massive boost to them defensively. I've spoken about several times, both on my FPL content and on my football podcast, Know the Score, about how important Branthwaite is to Everton and how I expect them to improve defensively when he does get back. And then we've got Greaves as well, of course, an upgrade on Johnson. He looks good from set pieces. They don't look too bad defensively as well as a 4 million. I could punt on someone like a Van der Berg at Brentford, given I don't have triple up on Brentford in this draft, but we're just not certain he's nailed, and I don't want to have to be making 4 million defender transfers, so I have gone with Greaves and Mikalenko as cheap backups to Rico Lewis in case he ever is rumoured to not start or ever misses out completely. Then moving to midfield, of course, Bukayo Saka is in here. I've gone with him over Mo Salah. The 2.8 million savings now for me is enough to potentially go and make the change. I don't think Salah is a bad option, and it wouldn't surprise me against Wolves if Salah goes and absolutely scores a hat-trick. Chelsea's right winger has scored a hat-trick against Wolves, and it wouldn't be surprising if Salah goes and does the same. But I have got a bit of Liverpool cover in this team, and I just think Saka is a fantastic long-term hold. The next 3 fixtures, of course, are so good for Arsenal. We're going with Luis Diaz as that Liverpool cover. As I spoke about, one of the reasons I wildcarded was because of that full rest during the midweek, that I think it definitely boosts Luis Diaz. I'd also already sold Jota, so I don't mind him if you still own him as a pick this week. He should start, given the minutes played midweek. It's not a guarantee, but it does feel certain that Luis Diaz will start at the weekend against Wolves, and I like him as a short-term option. He's probably the only one in my starting 11 that I could envisagably see selling over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Then we've gone with Brian Mbeumo. Now, Brian Mbeumo of Brentford feels like the lock in my midfield alongside Bukayo Saka. The long-term fixtures are great. He's on set pieces, he is on penalties, and they've started the season really well. And his goal-scoring form just continues to look absolutely fantastic. So Saka and Mbeumo and Luis Diaz feel pretty locked. And then the other two midfielders at the moment are Semenyo starting and then Smith Rowe on the bench as a rotating pair. Smith Rowe on the bench this week is a slightly worse fixture than any of my other attackers that I might bench away at Nottingham Forest. Forest have been pretty good defensively, and Semenyo has a great fixture at home to Southampton this week. And one of the big things is how well these two rotate. I use a website, I'm sure you've seen me use it, called FPL Rotation Planner. And a lot of people are going with Semenyo and they're going with Rodgers, but it just doesn't rotate well. So what you do on this website is you look at the number of players you want. So I want two midfielders. I want to start one of them every week. You select the game weeks you want and you select the teams you want to include. If you want one definitely to be in there, you can lock one, for example. But I want it to be two out of all of these teams. Leicester have Mavididi. Fulham, of course, have Smith Rowe. Everton have McNeil. Brentford have Carvalho. Brighton have someone like a Mitoma or a Minte. Bournemouth, of course, have Semenyo. And Aston Villa have Rodgers. And what you do is you click generate, and it gives you the best rotation players. And I've got the next 12 weeks as a sort of example, so I don't massively want to use my transfers there. Number one is actually the rotation that I put in my video earlier this week, and that is why it was in there. And that is Mavididi of Leicester along with Semenyo of Bournemouth. You can see the rotation they've got there. The only real weeks that they both have a good fixture maybe is game week 7 and then in game week 15 as well. The other thing to know about game week 7, Chris Wood is in my draft and he goes away to Chelsea in game week 7, so I could play Leicester's Mavididi and Semenyo of Bournemouth up against each other because they both have good fixtures. The two that I've got at the moment is the 6th best ranking. It is Smith Rowe and then it is Semenyo. Again, you can see them rotating pretty nicely here. Aston Villa at home in game week 8 for Smith Rowe. You've then got Everton away in game week 9 as well. A really nice run of fixtures all the way up until game week 17. And hopefully, with the way those both two are playing, I don't massively need to use a transfer. Now, what is really interesting is the most common two cheap midfielder options that we've got in Bournemouth and Aston Villa. Out of all of the combinations of these is the 3rd worst ranked rotation out of all of them on this list. They have good fixtures, both of them, but often in the same week, and they both have difficult fixtures often in the same week. You have loads of benching decisions like game week 6. Rodgers has a fantastic fixture, but most people going with Semenyo and Rodgers are just benching Rodgers anyway against Ipswich. Game week 5, okay fixtures. Game week 10, both difficult fixtures. And then loads of fixtures from game week 12 to game week 16. They just both have difficult fixtures in the same week. Now, there are other ones ranked highly. You could go with a McNeil with a Semenyo. You could go with a McNeil for the short term and go with a Minte for the long term, for example. But the two I look at is the one I put in my video earlier on in the week, which is Mavididi and Semenyo, or it is Semenyo and Smith Rowe. And given that I've already got the value tied up in Smith Rowe, given I started with him at 5.5, I have opted to go with Smith Rowe and Semenyo as my two cheap options as my rotating midfielders. Now, that is subject to change, but I'm pretty happy with how that is landed and what it allows me with the rest of the team. I could downgrade it, potentially and upgrade a Mikalenko and go Smith Rowe to a Mavididi, for example, and upgrade there. But I'm pretty sure Semenyo will be in, and then it will be Smith Rowe or Mavididi over going with Rodgers, who's unlikely to make my wildcard. Up front, of course, Erling Haaland is in there away at Newcastle this week, a great run of fixtures, and there's just no doubt that he's going to be in there. Chris Wood, of course, his newfound penalty taking is a real boost to him. I like him for the next 5 fixtures, and actually the Nottingham Forest fixtures end being good the same time the Brighton fixtures start being really good over the Christmas run. So something like a Chris Wood to a João Pedro will be very, very popular around those weeks. And then we've gone with Dominic Solanke. Now, I also like Watkins. I also like Jackson, but with no money in the bank, I can't afford them. I could downgrade it to someone like a Calvert-Lewin and upgrade a Smith Rowe if I wanted to do that. That's also a possibility going into the deadline. But I do really like the long-term Spurs fixtures over about the next 10 weeks. And I do think it's only a matter of time before Solanke really starts clicking into gear at Spurs and finding his goal-scoring form. As I said, this team leaves absolutely nothing in the bank for me. I could potentially downgrade a Smith Rowe if I wanted to upgrade. Solanke could go. There are a few places that I could potentially change. And of course, Manchester City are the early deadline going into game week 6 in case we get some early team news. In terms of captaincy and lineup in game week 6, lineup I am benching Smith Rowe. I don't massively see any of my front 8 that I would bench. He is away at Forest, who have defended well, even though they'll be without a manager and Gibbs White because of their red cards in game week 5. Mikalenko at home to Palace could play over Rico Lewis, but if Rico Lewis is starting, I just want to play him every week. And then we've got Greaves last on the bench with Fabianski. The last thing to discuss is captaincy between Bukayo Saka and Erling Haaland. I'm just so impressed by how involved Haaland is. Saka is doing well, but we haven't seen the explosive hauls from him so far. Plus, I do have triple Arsenal, so I have lots of investment on them already. So I am going to go with Erling Haaland, given he scored 10 goals in 2 games. It's pretty hard to ignore. Let me know in the comments who you would captain. Who is your captain this week? If you still own Salah, is it going to be Salah? If you own Saka, is it Saka? Or are you staying true on Erling Haaland? Some of you might own none of them. Are you looking at someone like a Cole Palmer and Ollie Watkins this week? Campsy, I do feel like is really interesting, so do let me know in the comment section down below. This is how we're lining up. We will discuss later in my final decisions video after all the press conferences if anything is likely to change. We'll also, of course, have the deadline stream on Saturday morning where we go to lock in this team and make those final news changes depending on if we get that early team news on Saturday morning. But this is where we're at. There's something pretty satisfying about building a wildcard draft that uses up every single bit, every last 0.1 of value that you can possibly get to. Something very satisfying about that, which is why I feel very happy with this team at the moment. I also get it's pretty template, right? There's a lot of teams being put out that look like this, but it is good for the long term. I do plan on rolling my transfers over the next 3 or 4 weeks to try and build up as many as 4 or 5 transfers, because as I've said, there are some fixture swings in about game week 12, which I will want to look to target. So I will need some transfers to go and do that. So this does set me up well for the long term, potentially roll some transfers over the next few weeks. Any questions you have about my wildcard draft, your transfers, all of that good stuff, drop it in the comment section down below. 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here. There will be a video out later today as well, so make sure you've got notifications on for that. The deadline stream on Saturday morning as well. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you all again very soon.